Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišák, and I work as the deputy head of the foreign desk at the Slovak daily Pravda, which by the name means truth, and is not the Russian Pravda. Who is running Iran? And what can the Iran-Iraq war tell us about the current conflict? These were just two of my questions I asked Matteo Mohamed Farzaneh, a full professor and chair of the history department at Northeastern Illinois University. We discuss his journey from Iran to the United States, what led him to study history, his perspective on the war against Iran launched by the United States and Israel on February 28, and why the regime in Tehran might be far more resilient than the West tends to assume. Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. You can find the link in the description of this episode. And now, on to the new debate. Matteo, if I may, first, could you briefly describe to our listeners your journey from Iran, where you were born in 1967, to the United States?
Thanks for having me. My name is Matteo Mohamed Farzaneh. I was born in 1967, in the oil city of Ahvaz, which is in the southwest of Iran, a few miles from the Iraqi border. Ahvaz is predominantly, all its businesses are related to oil. It's sort of like Houston in the United States. That's the closest thing that I can make the analogy. My family is from Isfahan, which is from the center of Iran. I come from a conservative background, but not super religious. I always say my dad prayed before he drank his whiskey every night. So, so make whatever you want out of that. I come from a middle class family. We were in Ahvaz all the way till 7th grade. I finished 7th grade, and in 8th grade, a day before, that's when the Iran-Iraq war started on September 22nd of 1980. We relocated to Isfahan for 4 years, and after 4 years, I went to Switzerland for a time period in Zurich, and then to Nicosia in Cyprus, the capital of Cyprus, and then moved to Southern California to Orange County. I completed high school there. I finished my first degree was in nursing. So I worked in the field of nursing for about 7 years. And then in year 2000, I traveled to what it used to be Czechoslovakia. So I went to Bratislava and Prague and some other smaller cities. And I was intrigued by the history, mostly in Czechoslovakia, but also by my own history. So I went back, and in summer of 2000, I went back to school. I got my second degree and then my master's degree in history, followed that up with a PhD in history from University of California in Santa Barbara, studied in Egypt for 2 summers, studied Arabic, modern standard Arabic, and then colloquial Arabic, and got a job here in Chicago at Northeastern Illinois University in 2010. So I moved with my wife here in 2010, and I'm now the chair of the department and also full professor of history. I have 2 publications. The first one is about Islamic involvement in constitutionalism in the Constitutional Revolution in 1906 to 1911. That won the Best First Book Award by the National History Honor Society. And then my second book was about Iranian women and gender in the Iran-Iraq War. And that also won an award by the Association for Iranian Studies and the Persian Heritage Fund. It won the Latife Yarshater Honorable Mention in 22. I'm writing a book right now about the anthology. It's not an anthology. It wanted to be an anthology, but it's a complicated subject about the perspectives of Iranians on the Iran-Iraq War. It was supposed to come out this year, but since I became chair, everything's kind of falling behind. And I'm also co-writing a book about history of Iranian women in sports. And that's going to be a few years from now. I'm also managing editor of Encyclopedia Iranica, as you see here. So between all of these, it keeps me very busy.
In fact, I wanted to ask you about the Iran-Iraq war because I wanted to ask you how were you affected by the war, and do you think it somehow shapes your assessment of the current war that the United States and Israel started against Iran on February 28th?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a historian and I teach history and I teach graduate students. And one of the first things we read is a book by Peter Novak, who was an illustrious historian and a historiographer of American history. And the name of the book is The Question of Objectivity, That Noble Dream, right? It's a noble dream to be objective. Nobody can be objective in history. You're partial to Bratislava. You're partial to Czechoslovakia. I'm partial to Ahvaz and I'm partial to Iran, obviously. We can be objective. We can exercise that. But deep down, we always, at least in my case, we always have our likes and our dislikes, obviously. So definitely the Iran-Iraq war made me a displaced person. I'm a displaced person because of war. Things could have been very, very different for me right now if the war hadn't happened. Maybe it would have been much better. Maybe it would have been much worse, right? We don't know. So definitely the Iran-Iraq war had affected me, affected my family because we're displaced, not so much financially, but mentally, because we did have a summer house in Isfahan. So we moved into our other house. That was, but the entire neighborhood moved in with us because we accepted everybody on our block in was to move. And it was a very, very complicated, emotional, mental situation for somebody in eighth grade. I volunteered for the war. After 2 years, as a 14-year-old, I became a junior paramedic with the Iranian Red Crescent, and I served for 2 years. And my first brother also volunteered with Jihad Sazandagi. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The Jihad is the construction corps that was created as a revolutionary organization, and he was captured by the Iraqis as a POW for 8 years. And he had a family, he had children when he went to war. And that destroyed our lives basically because it was very, very complicated. And then unfortunate things happened for him when he returned, which I don't think I should get into that right now. So definitely the war has affected us personally, familially, if we can say that, as a nation, and definitely I'm partial to all of that. That makes me a partial person.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you can apply this also to the journalism. In fact, before become journalist, I studied history also. So at the university, I studied history and philosophy, and then I moved my my career into journalism.
That makes
It
you a
was
better journalist.
I think so. I do agree. I very much do agree. But yes, we are not impartial human beings. You know, you are shaped by your experience and, of course, by your surroundings and all of this. So, what is your connection to Iran these days? Do you have people there you can somehow contact, and what do they say about the situation?
So my parents have passed away. So I don't have my parents. My brothers and sisters have moved away. I have a sister who only left Iran a few days before the war started to come visit her children here in the States. So I don't have immediate family, but I have a million cousins, aunts, my wife's family entirely, they're over there. My mother in law was supposed to be here actually last week. She had a ticket to come, but she's not here. They live on the north side of Iran on the Caspian Sea, so there's not as much bombings. It was during the 12-day war. There were a lot of bombings in their city, and one actually hit very close to their house. So it was a very scary situation during summer. But thankfully, nothing's happened in northern Iran. But in Esfahan, where my cousins are, I haven't heard from any of them till last week. We got a phone call for a few seconds that they were okay. A lot of them have moved to a village that we have relatives in, so they're out of the city. My cousins in Tehran, I haven't heard from, but I have a friend who gets dialysis treatment every 2 days. And the hospital that he used to get that dialysis was bombarded in Karaj. And I only heard through another friend who could contact me, and she offered to call anyone I wanted and she would let me know how they're doing. And apparently they had moved away to a smaller city to get his dialysis. The information we're getting is piecemeal, we call it. It's little by little. That creates for a very stressful situation, obviously, because at home, that's all we can talk about. And I have a 12-year-old who's a news junkie, we say. watching the news. So it's stressful for her at school, for me at work. So these are very difficult times.
So let's talk about those difficult times a bit more from the maybe analytical perspective. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed at the start of the war, and the fate of his son and successor, Mojtaba, is unclear, somewhat unclear. Yet the regime appears to be holding on. Why is that? Is it due to the way the regime is structured, or because at least some people still believe in it, or is it a bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. You're right about that. Let's start with the structure. Contrary to what people know and contrary to what people want to believe, because there's a lot of hate for a variety of reasons. So they might not be open that maybe these people are smarter than we think, right? It's like your enemy. You can hate your enemy, that's fine, but you need to get to your enemy. You need to know them. If you want to defeat them, you need to know them. A lot of people don't know them. I've written about constitutionalism in general in my first book and the role of Muslim clerics in it. I've studied the Islamic Republic's constitution in a variety of ways. And I can tell you the constitution allows for everything that's happening right now. That's number one. Number two, Iran learned how to do things from a baby step that started in February 79 and was catapulted, was pushed to adulthood, so to speak, during the 8-year war with Iraq. So all of its institutions, including its domestic security doctrine, its international relations, its regional, shifting its weight here and there, all of that is because of how Iran got involved in the war, was pushed into the war, how it perceived the world is looking at it, and how they genuinely believed that they were a victim of the imperialists, right? And not so much Israel at the beginning. Israel comes later, but mostly perhaps Soviet Union to a certain extent in the early days, but mostly the UK and mainly the United States. So they learned that they have enemies because of their ideology, and those enemies need to be put in their place to use their terminology. So the structure that they have in place is solid because it's based on a very painful 8-year experience. They had to do everything. They had to be self-sufficient. They had to find the money. They had to explain it to the people. And then there's Islamic or Shiite, in the case of Iranians, the Shiite ideology that drives a political zealotry that is very unique in Islamic societies. That's one thing the West doesn't understand. And if they would understand it, they shake their head that they understand it, but they don't. Because if they would understand it, they would realize that for Muslim Shiites, the grandest, the best case scenario is martyrdom, right? We have a saying in Persian, we say, there is no darker color than black, right? You can't do anything else to a dead body. You can mutilate it, but it's gone. You can burn it, but it's gone. The soul has arisen, right? And I'm just explaining, these are not things that I believe in necessarily, but these are what people don't understand what the mentality is like. So if you come from that kind of ideology, it's very, very potent and it can set you up against the world. And because the other side is not driven by this spiritual, by this religious dogma or ideology, then it's going to be very difficult to defeat these people, right? Same thing can be said about Islamic militants, right? You see the same case, perhaps in a different way, in the Palestinian cause against the Israeli occupation. Also, let me mention, I said there are two things you said about Mustafa Khamenei and the killing of his father. So you have a structure that's very solid, and the foundation, one part of the foundation, if you imagine this as a building, one pillar on this side, it's this Shiite ideology that I've written about. That was my first article that it won a couple of awards when it came out in 2007, that I explained this in a variety of ways, that Iran has two nationalisms. One is this Shiite ideology, and the other one is secular patriotism or nationalism that Iran has, simply because Iran has been a state of mind and an empire for over 2,500 years. So we cannot deny the fact that that's why this thing exists, right? Iranica. It stems from that kind of idea about the identity we have of ourselves as Persians, as Iranians, that we're very unique in the world because of our history, not because we're good people. Maybe we're not good people, but at the same time, we're very unique, right? And we've contributed in more than one way. So, because of these two nationalisms, and because of the structure that the Constitution allows, the institutions that were born out of the war, then it's no surprise that nothing's happening in Iran, and nothing will happen in Iran. I think if you've listened to any of my interviews, I said this long time ago. I've been saying it for a long time. Nothing can happen because the structure is extremely strong.
Just wanted to ask you, who is making the key political and military decisions now?
The institutions. The institutions are. So part of those institutions that I'm talking about, let's talk about it. The IRGC, Sepah Pastaran, right? Well, Sepah was created out of basically nothing. Sepah was a response by revolutionaries that came up with the idea that we cannot trust the regular army that used to be called the Imperial Army of Iran with all its pomp and circumstance and all the wonderful things that people associated with. They said we can't trust these people because they are indebted to West and some of them are stooges of the West, right? So they created this grassroots militia that its members come from the bottom of the social class. They come from rural areas. They come from areas that speak with a heavy Persian accent. Sometimes it's hard to understand them. So why am I saying all these things? It's because this is not a professional group of bureaucrats that were born and raised in northern part of Tehran with a silver spoon in their mouth. This is not your elite. And that makes a difference in a fighting force. If you have the elite, if you go to, we have the West Point here or the Virginia Military Institute, well, the elite go there, right? And among them are people from lower socioeconomic groups. But in the case of Iran, these people were the ones that believed the reforms of the Shah had done nothing for them. So they joined. So the IRGC is created on the premise that we are fighting the world because the world hates us because of who we are as Shiite Muslims that don't want anybody to meddle in our business. And we want to protect our Islamic revolution. And it's in the title of the organization. There is no Iran in it. It's called the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. It doesn't say of Iran or the Iranian Islamic. So this is a transnational organization. That's why Soleimani was so important when he was the head of the Quds force, as its foreign branch, so to speak. And there are other branches that people don't know and don't talk about. But there's a gazillion other mini subgroups that operate in a variety of ways. And I would be surprised, I would be very surprised if they're not in Europe or anywhere else. So again, by misjudging them, we're going to think that these institutions don't know anything because they haven't gone to Harvard or Princeton or Oxford. Institutions. The short answer to your question is institutions that are created.
Matteo, just before the war, the regime killed tens of thousands of protesters, so there is no doubt in my mind about how brutal the Iranian government can be, and we saw it also in the past. You said basically that the regime cannot be defeated, at least not by the means that we see now, so airstrikes and bombing and so on. But do you see any chance that the current situation could lead to a freer Iran? There are some opposition figure inside and abroad that can play a role in this.
There is no opposition abroad. It's a circus. There's a clown who wants to be king and he doesn't know left from right. So I'm not even going to talk about him. He's a stooge of the Israelis and the Americans, mostly Israelis. So nothing outside. People like me I hold an Iranian passport and an American passport, I will tell you that I'm insignificant in any fight against Islamic Republic. That's just the truth, right? And I'm not even sure if I should be involved in that because I don't live there. I can educate people and tell them both sides of the story, but that's it. I can give interviews. So nothing abroad. Inside is a different question. Inside, there was a vibrant opposition force that we call the reformists, people that wanted to engage. And it starts with President Mohammad Khatami back in the late 90s, early 2000s. See, the difficulty when people give interviews and they're asked this specific question is that, and I'm not talking about you in general, people that are the interviewees, they want to give this claim that they know exactly what's going on. And I certainly don't. I'm not in the regime. I don't talk to anybody in the regime. I'm not privy to any conversation of backdoor dealings that gets done. Who knows? Maybe Moscow is talking to Tehran, talking to Dubai, talking to I don't know. So, based on the history of the Islamic Republic and what's in the Constitution, there is only one way moving forward. If anybody wants to make changes, they have to stop and do this one thing, and that is to get rid of Article 110 of the Islamic Revolution Constitution that gives absolute power and a veto power to the supreme leader. Without that, you can have all the reforms, all the wonderful laws, all the trade agreements. Bratislava is going to come and say, we're going to give you the world if you make a deal with it. Fine. They can sign all the documents without the supreme leader's explicit signature and seal. It's not going to happen. So, where does it take us? The question is IRGC controlling the supreme leader, or is it the other way around? Until February 28th, 16, 17 days ago, everybody was wondering who controls what. They're still questioning that, which is really astonishing to me because I think that we've got the answer. The IRGC controls the supreme leadership. End of the story. From what we're reading, from what we're hearing on the airwaves, apparently the IRGC does a tremendous job of lobbying the members of the assembly that had voted for Mustafa Khamenei. There's a report that I think came out yesterday, or maybe it was early this morning I was reading, that actually Khamenei had mentioned in several of his talks with the people around him that he really didn't want his son to be involved. So why would they go against that? Why is it that the IRGC is so hell-bent in continuing this and making this a game for them rather than a game for the Iranian people? Well, because they think, and I think part of it comes from the Iran-Iraq war, they see themselves as the rightful heirs of Iranian defense because they were there when the Iran-Iraq war happened. They gave the most amount of casualties. They paid for it not only by their lives, but one gave a hand, one gave a foot, one gave a spleen, one gave a kidney, somebody's teeth was knocked out. So they feel like the Islamic country or the Islamic nation or Iran, in their eyes, owes them something. And even if Iran doesn't owe them anything, if they're not even thinking that, they're probably thinking, the hell with them. I don't care what they think. I know what I want. In a way, I think you have a military junta right now controlling things. And depending on who you ask inside Iran, they're happy with the way. I know of several families here that I've talked to, and in California, and in other places in New York or in Texas, that they're quite pleased with the way the IRGC is responding to the bullying of the Israelis and the bombing of the Americans and Israelis together. So, in some ways, there is a love-hate relationship with IRGC, but like you mentioned, they do engage in violent acts against people. They do torture. They do kill innocent people. They do kill people that they think they're not innocent and guilty, right? But that's a security apparatus. If you talk to people from the last regime, the Shah's regime, the Savak, you're probably familiar with the Savak, with the secret police, the Queen has said it multiple times. Well, we had it because you need to have a security apparatus. It's very simple. And you talk to these people, they're going to say the same thing. We have a security apparatus. We can't just let people do whatever they want. You talk to Americans, we still have Guantanamo. We still have children in cages. We still keep at the border, right? We even test on women who are pregnant in America because there are no laws. Nothing's protecting them. So in some ways, I would think this is a global issue that when governments are running things, think they can get away with things and they do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think Mujtaba, I think is just a figurehead. And because we haven't seen him and we haven't heard him, right? For whatever reason, I don't know what the reasons are. It's interesting to know when, should I say if and when we get to hear and see what he has to say. And remember, he's not an Ayatollah. Technically, he never got his degree. So
President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have described what's happening both as a war and as an excursion, no matter what it means. At times they say it was won on day one, but also it has only just begun. How do you interpret those messages? It almost sounds like the administration is trying to explain something it doesn't fully control.
you can take this in two ways if we want to be serious about this question. I think it's easy for me to say, oh, they're idiots. They don't know what they're doing. End of the story. And that would what would Democrats say, right? Because they're Republican. So it's a party issue. I don't put any difference between Republicans and Democrats. They're both forward the American foreign policy, which is dominance. That's just the end of the story. So in one way, I could say, yeah, they're idiots. They don't know. They're stupid. And there's no objective because they're showing it, right? They're demonstrating that. One day it's this, one day it's the other. But I think there is a more serious question that can be asked and discussed. Who wins in all of this, right? When George W. Bush went on that aircraft carrier, I don't know if you remember, and said mission accomplished. He was not incorrect. He was right. Mission was accomplished. They had put out a government that was not friendly to them. They overthrown the government, Saddam Hussein's government. Halliburton and all the oil companies were going to benefit. These are the companies that pay heavily into campaign finance for politicians to get elected. So that's a filter in the United States that we use. So when you give that kind of business to people, then of course your mission is accomplished. And then all the weapon makers, people that make all these missiles and bombs and the aircraft carriers and everything that goes with it, people that sell bagels, people that sell meat to the army. These people are making exorbitant amounts of money because they go through the process and they're probably price gouging all the time, right? So there's a certain amount of corruption in there. Of course, the weapon makers are very happy because now we have a depleted stockpile of weapons. We have spent $3.4 billion for Israel that we paid already. Now there's another 500 million as an emergency measure for them to get. So where does this come out of? It comes out of taxpayers' money, but Americans are asleep. They're either too busy with life, or maybe they don't care, or maybe they don't think it's their problems. Whatever it is, nobody really is paying attention. There's a small group, but that's about it. So I think you have two answers for this question. Why is Hegseth and Trump talking the way they do? You could say because they're stupid and there's no objective, and you could be right. And at the same time, you could say, well, no. And what I believe in personally, I think the objective was all along to destroy Iran, destroy its infrastructure, destroy its beauty, destroy its heritage. But they might get away with destruction of material things, but Iran is more than that. Iran will live forever because it's got a very strong history and it's got a language, and our language is incredibly influential in the region. It's not just something that I speak, it's something that we promote in Iranic, and we're trying to make the world see that you are not just talking to a nation state. We're not Kuwait. We're not Jordan. It's and if I sound patriotic, I might be, but at the same time, I'm speaking from a historical perspective. So I think destroying Iran is going to be beneficial from the standpoint of Israelis and Americans because they're not going to be an issue for anybody. So Israel can do whatever it wants, left unchecked.
So a final one, maybe the hardest, just very briefly. So what do you expect in the next maybe weeks, months? Further escalations or?
Yeah, last week on Fox, local Fox channel, I said the war would be over within a few days, if not a week or two. I still say that because of the stock market, price of oil, the depletion. I don't know how true that is. I have to believe what comes out of the press, the depletion of interceptors. Public opinion, I don't know if that matters so much. Governments never care what the public thinks. That's something we want to believe. I don't think it matters. And they are seeing that Iran is not going to budge. Iran is just not going to budge. And when Araghchi, the foreign minister, was asked last week by somebody here, well, there are going to be boots on the ground. What's your response? It's like, we're waiting for them. And that comes out of the Iran-Iraq war. That kind of confidence comes out of the Iran-Iraq war. This is not their first, as we say here, this is not Iran's first rodeo. They've done this for 8 years, remember that. And that's very, very important. I wrote an op-ed, and nobody published it. I might publish it myself, trying to have people think about the Iran-Iraq war as a main axis of how you can guess what the Islamic Republic is going to do. If you don't understand that, then you're going to miss a huge chunk of the future of Iran.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe and listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. The link is in the episode description. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.